Something's happening on our back roads that nobody's talking about. Black trucks with no markings, no plates, moving through remote areas in the dead of night. But these aren't your typical government vehicles. These trucks are different, modified, reinforced, designed to carry something they don't want anyone to see. They follow specific routes, always avoiding main highways, always staying off the radar. The official story? They don't exist. No records, no documentation, no acknowledgement. But people are seeing them, and what they're witnessing tells a disturbing story. These trucks move in patterns, always with escort vehicles, always maintaining radio silence. They appear in remote areas, on roads most people never use, at hours when no one should be watching. But people are watching, and what they're seeing doesn't add up. Tonight, we're looking at what these trucks are really being used for. This first email comes from someone who lives just outside of Yellowstone National Park. Here's what they had to say. Hey Donovan, I've been wrestling with whether or not to send this, but it's been sitting heavy on me since it happened. You might think I'm crazy by the end of this email, but I promise you everything I'm about to tell you is exactly how I remember it. I live just outside Gardner, Montana, right near Yellowstone's north entrance. It's the kind of place where you get used to nature being your neighbor, elk in your yard, bears on your porch, that sort of thing. But lately there's been something different going on around here. It all started maybe 4 or 5 months ago. I'd been having trouble sleeping, so I'd be up late most nights, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, trying to unwind. That's when I first noticed the trucks. These weren't regular trucks like you'd see hauling livestock or equipment. These were big, black, and unmarked. They looked like military transports, but more sinister somehow. Reinforced sides, heavy-duty suspension, no windows. The first time I saw one, it was well past midnight. It was taking the old service road that cuts behind my property. Nobody uses that road anymore. It doesn't lead anywhere except deeper into the back country. I only caught a glimpse of it through the trees, but it gave me this uneasy feeling, like it didn't belong here. A smaller SUV followed it, staying close like an escort. Both vehicles had their lights dimmed, and they weren't making much noise, odd for such large vehicles. Over the next couple of weeks, I started noticing a pattern. These trucks would come through about every 2 weeks, sometimes more often, always in the dead of night, always on that same road. They never used the main highway, or even the gravel roads most locals use to avoid traffic during tourist season. They were deliberate, careful, like they didn't want to be seen. Then came the night that changed everything. It was about 3 a.m., and I was deep asleep when this crash jolted me awake. It was so loud it shook the house, like a thunderclap right outside my window. My first thought was that a tree had fallen, or maybe a rock slide hit the road. I threw on some boots, grabbed my flashlight, and went outside to see what happened. The site I walked into still doesn't feel real. One of those black trucks was on its side, right on the bend where the service road curves around my property. The SUV was parked a little ways ahead, its headlights cutting through the dust. There were men everywhere, at least 6 of them, maybe more, dressed in black uniforms. No logos, no names, just plain black with some kind of body armor. They had guns too. Big ones. The truck's back end was ripped open like a soda can, and out of it had spilled this massive steel cage. I mean, this thing was enormous, at least 10 feet long and 6 feet high, with reinforced bars that looked like they could hold a grizzly. Except, they couldn't. The cage was bent, almost like it had been pried open from the inside, and whatever had been in it was gone. At first, I thought maybe they were hauling livestock. Bison, maybe, or a big bear. But then I saw the tracks leading away from the cage. They weren't hoof prints or paw prints. They looked almost human, but way too big. I was frozen there, crouched behind the fence, watching as the men scrambled to secure the area. That's when I heard it. This sound came from the woods, low, guttural, almost like a growl, but not quite. It had this strange metallic edge to it, like a machine trying to imitate an animal. The men all turned toward the sound, their guns up, scanning the tree line with flashlights. Then it came again, louder this time, closer. What happened next was chaos. One of the men shouted something I couldn't make out, and the others started firing into the woods. Not just a couple of shots, but full-on bursts, like they were trying to take down a tank. The muzzle flashes lit up the trees, and for a split second I saw it. This thing, whatever it was, moved between the trees faster than anything I've ever seen. It was hunched, almost crawling, but its limbs were too long, too thin. Its skin looked pale in the light, almost translucent, and its eyes, God, its eyes. They glowed like an animal caught in headlights, but brighter, more intense, almost like they were staring straight through me even though I was hidden. The thing let out this scream that made my ears ring. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. A mix of static, metal grinding, and pure rage. It bolted deeper into the woods, and the men gave chase, disappearing into the darkness. I stayed where I was, too scared to move, until the gunfire finally stopped. About 20 minutes later, the men came back. They used a winch to haul the overturned truck upright and threw a tarp over the whole mess before speeding off like nothing had happened. By morning, there wasn't a single sign anything had occurred. No tire tracks, no debris. It was like they'd erased the whole event. Since that night, things haven't felt right around here. I've been hearing strange noises late at night, deep thuds, almost like footsteps, and low vibrations that make the windows rattle. A couple of neighbors have mentioned odd things too, missing livestock, strange lights in the woods, but nobody wants to push it. Out here, folks mind their own business, but I can't shake the feeling that something bigger is going on. Those trucks are headed into Yellowstone. I'm sure of it. There's enough backcountry out there to hide anything they don't want the public to see. And after what I saw that night, I'd bet my life they're transporting something we're not supposed to know about. Let me know if you need me to map out where this happened, or give more details. I haven't told anyone else, and honestly, I don't know if I should. But I figured if anyone would take this seriously, it'd be you. Something strange happened to me in mid-August of this year, August 12th to be exact, down near Panama City, Florida, and it's been on my mind ever since. I work as a contractor who specializes in repairs for commercial-grade cryogenic freezers, the kind you sometimes see in big medical labs or specialized wellness clinics. But never in my whole career have I encountered a setup like the one I was called to fix that day. It started when I got this frantic phone call around 6:30 in the morning from a number I didn't recognize. That's not unusual, because my business card and contact info float around different circles. People call me when their standard corporate support lines either aren't answering or can't get there fast enough. But this call was different. The person on the other end sounded almost frantic. He basically said something like, "Hey, we heard you're the best local guy for specialized cryo systems. We've got an urgent situation on a transport unit, and we need you to come right away." Didn't offer any details, just insisted I keep it quiet and come alone. I've had a few hush-hush jobs before, places that don't want to advertise having a malfunction, but this one was off the charts. They gave me directions to a parking lot behind an old seafood processing facility off US 98, not too far from the Hathaway Bridge. It's an area I've passed a bunch of times back in the day, but I never really ventured behind those warehouses because there's not much going on there except trucks loading and unloading. So I get there, and I immediately notice a strange setup. An unmarked all-black semi-trailer, maybe 53 feet long. Nothing indicated what company it belonged to. No plates that I could see easily either. Parked next to it were two black SUVs. Mind you, it's broad daylight, about 8 a.m. by then, and the guys around it looked like they might have been some sort of security detail. Earpieces, serious faces, you know the type. When I approached, this tall guy with a buzz cut came over and told me to power down my phone and leave it in my truck for security reasons. Honestly, I thought about refusing, but something in his manner was so intense, I just did what he asked. He walked me to the trailer, introduced me to the person who had called me, and that person basically said, "We're in a real bind here. We can't go through the manufacturer or any official channels because we're on a tight schedule, and the entire system is throwing an error code. We're losing temperatures fast, and we need your help to get it stable." So they open up this trailer, and it was like I stepped into another world. Donovan, this wasn't anything remotely like your typical reefer truck used for transporting frozen foods. Right away, I could tell it was built to reach extremely low temps, definitely lower than -100 Celsius. The interior was layered with some kind of specialized thermal insulation. Looked like something out of NASA's Johnson Space Center cryo labs. And the smell, sharp, metallic, with that weird cold chemical hint you only get from specialized cryocoolants. I've worked on a few advanced liquid nitrogen systems in the past, but never in a mobile unit this big or complicated. What stood out the most were these huge battery racks. They weren't standard lead acid or even typical lithium-ion truck batteries. These looked more like industrial power cells, possibly a custom job. There were rows lining the top corners and bottom compartments, integrated with a monstrous set of cooling pipes and multi-stage refrigeration units. It was far more advanced than anything you'd expect to see in a standard commercial trailer. I half joked in my head that I've seen simpler layouts on rocket test stands at Stennis Space Center. It had multiple redundancies, like they were prepared for any failure scenario, but no brand labels, no manufacturer plates, just a bunch of serial numbers. They wanted me to reset and recalibrate the entire system. The readouts were showing that the temperature had crept up beyond their set point, around -55 Celsius, and apparently it needed to be stable at -70 or below. That alone told me they were preserving something that demanded unbelievably cold conditions. I tried to ask them about the cargo, purely so I'd know how best to fix it. But they shut me down, said they weren't at liberty to discuss specifics. I knew better than to press further, because the tension was so thick you could slice it with a knife. Now, I know cryo systems fairly well, so it didn't take me too long to figure out that there was a coolant flow issue in the main lines. The pump that circulates the cryo fluid had partially seized up, possibly a bubble in the system or contamination. I ended up draining the fluid from the exterior valve, which wasn't easy since the external release was locked behind some heavy shielding. Once I got it open, I noticed the fluid itself looked off, cloudy and almost shimmering under the light. Not like any typical LN2 or LCO2 mix I've dealt with. I mean, if it was LN2, it should have evaporated immediately in the Florida heat. But this stuff lingered like it had a higher boiling point, which is contradictory to LN2. Whatever it was, it's obviously proprietary or experimental. They had me working on it for close to 4 hours. During that time, I overheard bits and pieces of conversation from the staff, who kept their distance but still hovered around anxiously. They never directly told me anything, but I caught references to holding facility and out of containment. At one point, I saw a guy in a suit step out from the passenger side of an SUV and speak quietly with one of the workers, glancing in my direction with a worried look. I couldn't make out details, but my gut told me there was a lot more going on than a malfunctioning cryogenic truck. Anyway, I got it operational. The system started pulling the interior temperature back down to -70, with no more error codes. I told them they should really do a thorough purge and system check once they reached their final destination. But they brushed me off. I made them sign my invoice, which, by the way, was the weirdest part. They signed with a single initial and gave me a thick, plain envelope of cash. Normally, my clients pay by business check or credit. This felt more like hush money than anything else. A bit of a side note, I once did a repair on a top-tier cryotherapy chamber in Los Angeles for some big-shot actor who insisted on -120 Celsius sessions. But even that system was nowhere near as complex and secretive as what I saw in that trailer. Plus, in that LA job, they had labels from known manufacturers and standard LN2 tanks. This truck was like a black project on wheels. And here's the kicker. As soon as I finished, they basically shuffled me off the site. One of the guys walked me back to my own truck and waited until I drove away. I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw them closing up the trailer. The entire thing was done in such a hush-hush manner that I felt like I was trespassing on some top-secret facility. That evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in that trailer was not something normal. The only reason you'd need sustained temps that low would be for specialized biological or perhaps exotic material transport. But that quickly begs the question, why do it in an unmarked truck with a covert security detail? I've repaired enough cryo equipment for labs that handle everything from pig organs to cutting-edge biotech, but they never had shady teams in black SUVs standing watch. And the fact that that fluid wasn't normal LN2 or any standard coolant has had me puzzling over it for weeks. You know, I've heard stories about how certain government agencies or private defense contractors move unusual biological cargo. Some even say it could be extraterrestrial remains or unknown life forms across the country. I typically dismiss that stuff as internet lore, but after this experience, let's just say I'm not as quick to scoff. I'd bet my entire rig that truck was storing something that no run-of-the-mill medical facility could handle. Maybe it was a classified organism, maybe some top-secret device, or maybe something worse. I told my wife a watered-down version of what happened, mostly so she wouldn't worry. But she could see I was spooked. Nothing about that day was normal. The next time I was in the area, I drove by the same warehouse, sometime around early September, and the parking lot was practically empty. Looked like the building might even be abandoned. No sign of any truck or anyone else. I have no clue where they went or who they were. I'm writing this to you, Donovan, because your channel covers strange experiences, cover-ups, and that whole realm of bizarre happenings. If anyone could appreciate the significance of a random contractor stumbling onto something he probably wasn't meant to see, it'd be you. You don't have to believe me, but I guarantee I can pass any polygraph about this incident. I don't think I'll ever get a straight answer about what that trailer was transporting, but I can't shake the feeling that I was one small cog in a much bigger operation. Take this for what it's worth. Part of me hopes I never get another call like that. Another part of me is morbidly curious to know more. All I can say is, if you ever hear about any unexplainable cargo being moved on the sly across Florida, there might be a connection to what I witnessed.